Good morning. It's already past the hour, and I don't see other committee members here, but I would like to get started in consideration of everyone's time. We have the Chief Warrant Officer here and the Sergeant Major here, and I think we can move ahead and make this thing happen. This morning, we're going to be focusing on long-term housing. And we'll start off with our presentations from Bob Held, from the who's the Director of Nursing Facility Rates and Policy Continuing Care at the Minnesota Department of Human Services, to talk about DHS's program.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. I'm Bob Held from the Department of Human Services. And I was asked to talk about funding for nursing facilities, and it was also mentioned that I should talk a little bit about what we call rebalancing. So those are the two topics that I've prepared to briefly describe for you this morning.
Thank you.
Funding for nursing homes, and I'm talking about the roughly 370 community nursing homes in Minnesota that are in the medical assistance program, is on a per-day basis. The facility provides a day of service, and they're paid a specific rate for that day of service. If they're in the Medicaid program, the Department of Human Services sets the rates, and those are set for each individual facility. Each facility has a different set of rates. If you look at exhibit or table number 1 on this handout, you'll see that the medical assistance program, which is what's administered by the Department of Human Services, pays for 57% of all nursing home resident days for the homes that are in the Medicaid program. And by the way, about 97% of Minnesota nursing homes are in the Medicaid program. There's approximately 18 or 20, including the veterans homes, that are not in the Medicaid program. Private pay accounts for 25.4% of resident days, and Medicare is kind of an interesting phenomenon because it's only 9.1% of resident days, but if you look at the next column over, it accounts for 17% of the facility's revenues. And you can see that the Medicare rate is more than double the Medicaid rate. And the reason for that is that Medicare covers only short stays, and it's a more inclusive rate, so that things like primarily rehab services and pharmacy products, all prescription drugs, are included in a per diem Medicare rate, whereas the Medicaid rate does not include those types of services. They're billed separately. And then other is 8%, and other is primarily Medicare and Medicaid managed care, and the facilities have been unable to provide us information to clearly and reliably distinguish exactly what those days are. They may include some veterans contracts as well. And then if you look at Table 2, you'll see that it describes overall the total revenues that we estimate the nursing home industry in Minnesota receives, including the non-MA facilities. Medicaid, along with recipient resources for people that are on Medicaid, is about $1 billion. And then private pay is about $500 million, a little bit less for Medicare, and about $333,000 or so for other, and then $63 million in the non-Medicaid facilities, for a total of over $2.3 billion of revenue. You may have caught the nuance earlier when I said that we set the rates for facilities, and that's plural, because each facility not only has different rates, but they have 50 rates within each facility, because in Minnesota we use a case mix system. We've had case mix since about 1985, and about 2001 or 2002, Minnesota converted from a homegrown case mix or acuity adjusting system with 11 categories to the federally designed RUGS system. RUGS stands for Resource Utilization Groups, and that had 36 groups, and that was converted a couple years ago by the feds to a 50 group. It's actually a 48 group, and then we have 2 additional classifications that we use specifically in Minnesota. So it's a pretty refined method of classifying residents into what level of care they're getting, what the acuity, what resources are required to provide their care, so that the payment can be adjusted to match that. If you don't do that, the risk is that a facility would decline to admit heavy care people that will need a lot of resources, and instead would prefer to, for the same amount of resources or payment, to admit somebody who will require less care, and that's the opposite of the incentive that we would like to create. An additional important thing for the committee to be aware of in how nursing homes are funded is that Minnesota is one of only 2 states in the country that has what we call rate equalization in law, which says that you cannot charge more to a private paying person than the rate that Medicaid would pay for that same person given their case mix class. There are exceptions to that, and particularly there's an exception for single bed rooms. So if a person is in a single bed room, then the facility can charge whatever the market will bear. But if they're in a shared room, then they're limited by rate equalization. Currently in Minnesota, about 47% of all licensed beds in the Medicaid program are in single bed rooms. So before I move on to rebalancing, are there any questions that the committee would like to ask on the topic of funding?
Representative.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And who administers the contracts with these private homes?
Mr. Chair, Representative Detmer, I didn't get into this. There's a whole, I could take several hours of your day today, but we have what's called the alternative payment system for nursing facilities, which isn't really not an alternative anymore because every facility is in that system. And it's what we call a rate-on-rate model. Whatever your rate is, if there's going to be an adjustment provided by legislation, it's a percentage applied to the prior rate. And that's under what we call the APS Alternative Payment System contract, and that's administered within my division.
Okay. Is there a reason why, Mr. Hill, that the Veterans Home isn't under the same system? Is it because they receive payments from the VA?
I think you'd have to ask the Veterans Home that, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Thank you.
There's 2 major policy initiatives that the department has worked on with regard to nursing facilities. And the one that I think is of the most interest to the committee is what we call rebalancing. And the idea is that historically Minnesota is a state that has been very overbedded. We had among the most beds per 1,000 elderly of all states in the country. I think when we were at our peak, we ranked about 4th or 5th. We have had a policy in Minnesota to try to shift where long-term care is provided out of an institutional setting into more of a person's own home, a less restrictive place, more of their choosing. And this goes back to the early 80s when Minnesota enacted a moratorium. The nursing home kept growing and growing. It peaked at about 48,000 beds that were all licensed beds. And the state felt that it would be better to shift where care was provided into the home setting where it would not only be preferred by individuals in most cases, but would be less expensive for the state when the person became Medicaid eligible. And since the moratorium was enacted, just over 1/3 of all Minnesota beds have been closed. There have been a number of facilities that have closed, probably a net closure of about 75 facilities, and which would be about 15%. But many facilities have also closed beds. The moratorium simply says, under no circumstances, no way can any beds be added to be licensed or certified in Minnesota. Now, there is a couple exceptions to that, but almost the only exception to that would be for the legislature to say, okay, we're going to allow this bed to be licensed and certified. You can have 20 new beds in the lowest bedded county in the state, or the veterans' homes could not, on their own, decide to become certified for Medicaid. It would require legislation for that to happen. Other strategies, briefly, that have been put in place included funding programs for home and community-based services, pre-admission screening to look at people before they come into nursing homes to assure that they need nursing home care, gaps analysis, looking at a planning process for each county as to where the gaps are to encourage the creation of home and community-based services, grants to support them in developing those services, strategies to reduce the availability of nursing home beds, a layaway program that allows a facility to put a bed in the bank, so to speak, and not have to pay their bed tax on beds that are in layaway status, and still be able to take them out of layaway with a half a year's notice. Other strategies include planned closure incentive payments, another incentive payment for creating single bedrooms, consolidation program, and new programs such as the Return to Community program, Moving Home Minnesota, and the currently underway Olmsted planning that's going on.
I believe Representative Detmer has a question.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And Mr. Held, you said that there's a decrease in closing of nursing homes. Now, is that going to be continuing a trend that way? But we have a baby booming generation now that are in our 60s. Do you see that going the other way?
We think it's... we produce a report called the status of, Mr. Chair, Representative Detmer, we produce a report every other year called the status of long-term care in Minnesota. It will be published probably in the next 2 weeks, the newest version of this report. And one of the things that we're required to do in terms of nursing homes is answer the question in there, is it time to lift the moratorium or alter it in some way? Are we, because of the demographics that you described, are we going to run short on nursing home beds? Every 2 years when we write this report, we look at the trend. We see that facilities have closed. Continuing operating facilities have continued to take beds out of service. The number of beds per 1,000 elderly in Minnesota, if you define elderly as 65 and older, continues to be greater than the national average, but those lines are converging. And the number of beds per elderly 85 and older has crossed the line. We just now became 0.4% less than the national average on that measure. So we're still a well-bedded state. And each year we think, okay, we've got this trend. Beds continue to close. We're not seeing evidence of access problems. Do we predict that it continues? And we say, well, it could change, but we think it's going to continue. And each time we look back and we were right. And in the report that's going to come out, we continue to make that prediction that this long-term trend of closing beds is going to continue. What's interesting is that when you look at the rate of utilization, in other words, of people 85 and older, which is the main population using nursing homes, what portion of them are in a nursing home at any point in time? And that percentage has been consistently dropping for about 30 years now. It used to be, back in 1984, that 36% of all people 85 and older resided in a nursing home on any given day. That's now 14%. The demographics are going one way. The utilization rate is going the other way. And we think that at least until 2030, the closure of beds and the need for beds are going to stay in balance. Right now, the occupancy rate in nursing homes, which I think is a really critical indicator of this, is the lowest that we've ever recorded for as far back as we have data. 90% of beds are occupied right now, 10% vacancy. So we're not looking at a problem. We do have a provision that allows the addition of beds in areas that are this is another exception in the moratorium, in areas that are having a hardship for access to nursing home beds.
Just to follow up, Mr. Chair.
Yes, Representative.
Mr. Held, So what we're probably saying, what we're saying here then is that more people as they age are probably staying home in their own homes longer for a longer period of time, or taken care of by family members, or can we draw a conclusion to that then?
Mr. Chair, Representative Detmer, that would be the conclusion. The portion of people that are receiving long-term care funded by the state in a home and community-based setting as opposed to a nursing home setting is growing. Mm-hmm. That's where the demand is. That's what people are choosing. A lot of that is through assisted living.
Yeah.
Mr. Held, there has been some discussion of the veterans' homes being CMS certified. Would that necessarily put them under control of DHS then?
I would, Mr. Chair, I would presume that if they became Medicaid certified, unless the legislature chose to do otherwise, and I'm not sure how you do that, that we would be responsible for setting their payment rates, that they would undergo the certification inspection process that's done by the health department under contract with Human Services, and they would have to comply with all those requirements, that their residents would have to establish eligibility for Medicaid the same as anybody else. I presume that's how that would work.
Good. I just want to mention that because I know it has been a matter of discussion. So thank you. I have one more question. It's something that I've seen in various reports, is that as a result of the conflicts in Iraq and Afghanistan, we have a lot of young veterans with traumatic brain injury. And there was some concern that nursing homes wouldn't be able to accommodate all the young veterans that are suffering from that. Is that a trend that you're seeing? Is there any sort of increase among younger people going into nursing homes or needing care as a result of TBI?
Mr. Chair, I don't know specifically about that need. What I do know is that the number of people in nursing homes under 65 is currently about 10% of the total population. Total population is about 27,000. And it's been hovering in that area for many years in terms of the actual number. It used to be 7% of a much bigger number of beds, or much bigger population, but it's now 10% of the population is under 65, and what portion of them may be veterans with TBI, I couldn't tell you.
And other than nursing homes, if we are having an increase, is that being reflected in group homes, or is that something that's not under your purview?
Mr. Chair, it's not under my purview, but we could try and find information within the department to see if we have anything on that.
I would appreciate that, because there have been various reports that have been done that have indicated there's going to be a large number of veterans that will be needing care, and it might be that a group home setting is more appropriate. Yeah, in setting the rates for each of the facilities, I think you mentioned there's a variety of factors that are considered. Do they all have to do with the severity of the illness of the patient in the nursing home?
Mr. Chair,
or does it depend on location of the nursing home? I mean, what types of factors do you consider?
Mr. Chair, within each facility, the variation in rates is related to acuity, to the severity of their needs. Mm-hmm. Between nursing homes, there would be a different rate, probably for every one of the 370 facilities for each of those 50 categories. The reason for those different rates do have a geographic relationship. The deep rural and then the rural are respectively less in their rates than the metro area. And it's a historical artifact of how we set rates.
Sounds like an administrative nightmare.
We use a computer.
Okay.
Yeah, to have 15,000 rates or probably close to 20,000 rates that we pay across the state.
So if someone becomes a little more ill, then you have to adjust the rates, or if they appear to be getting healthier, the rates are adjusted?
Mr. Chair, the federal government requires facilities on at least a quarterly basis to perform an assessment of each resident's needs. That assessment uses a form called the minimum data set, and it's mandated for Medicare and Medicaid residents. The MDS is used on a quarterly basis to classify the residents with their needs. So it's done at least quarterly. If there's a significant change in their condition, it could be done under those circumstances with greater frequency.
Okay, good. Oh, yes, yeah, that's important. Do you have data on the number of veterans that are in private nursing homes or facilities other than the veterans' homes? Is that something data that's kept somewhere?
Mr. Chair, I don't have that data, or at least we haven't analyzed it, and I don't know if we have that information. If we had it, it would probably be in that MDS form, and I can look to find out if that's available.
I would appreciate that, because I think that we have quite a few veterans that are in private nursing homes. Okay, thank you. Do you have anything else to add, or do you have any questions? Okay.
Well, as my colleagues know, I could rattle on for hours if you allowed me to, but I don't think we will do that today.
Good. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Howell. Thank you. And then next, we're going to have Ms. Helen Roberts from Fiscal Analyst do an overview of the state home finances. So, Helen, please.
Mr. Chair, if it's okay, I'll just do it from
Yes.
here. Members should have these pie charts. Send this down. And I'm just going to, again, just do a summary of how the homes are funded. To begin with, the Department of Veterans Affairs has two programs, the Veterans Services Program and the Veterans Health Care Program. You heard about some of the things that are funded in the Veterans Services Program yesterday, including the MACV grant and the CVSO grants, and it also includes things like the cemetery operations, the federal claims assistance, the honor guard. So those are all in Veterans Services. Veterans Health Care Program is for the veterans home, and the 5 veterans homes. And as you can see on the first pie chart, that looking back at fiscal year 12 and 13, that this program was 77% of the department's expenditures for the biennium. So it is the largest part of the department's financial activity. Moving on to the second page, I just want to explain briefly how the veterans' homes are funded, and this will be familiar to both of the representatives since you're both on state government finance. But the homes are funded through a combination of the state general fund appropriation, which is made in the state government finance bill, along with residents, the maintenance charges for residents, and then the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs per diems, and then a small amount of donations. The general fund appropriation is then transferred into the special revenue fund, where it's combined with the residents' maintenance charges and the per diems, and then all expenditures are made from this special revenue account. And then you can see again the second pie chart explains the sources of funds for fiscal year 12 and 13, and that you'll see that the general fund appropriation was the largest piece of the sources of funding. And I should also note that for fiscal year 14 and 15 moving forward, the general fund appropriation will be is $94 million for the biennium, and this increase is for the IT improvement initiative that the governor and the department requested. And then finally, the last page shows a breakdown of the fiscal year 12 and 13 expenditures from the special revenue account by home, and then you'll also see there's a separate line for the administration and central services, and then for adult daycare. And you'll obviously note that Minneapolis, again, is the largest portion of the expenditures. So that is a really brief summary of how they're funded. You do have additional information in your books that breaks down both the revenues and the expenditures by home. So that's available, and if there's other sorts of detail that the committee would like, I can pursue that for you.
Okay, thank you. Any questions to present that next? Okay, thank you. All right, we've saved time for Commissioner Carucci, who would come forward and give us an overview for the Department of Home Affairs. Welcome.
Good morning, sir. If you could be patient with me for just a second and see if I am technologically challenged or not today. Apparently not so much. Mr. Chair, I've also brought with me today my Senior Director, Robin Gottstead, and the reason for that is because, as you know, this is a complicated conversation. She's very familiar and has been with the agency for quite a while, so she'll be able to provide some insight to perhaps some of the questions that you have or may have overall. And if you'll just give me a second as my computer is getting ready to work up. I also want to just point out for the committee members that I don't have my finance director here, Helen, and she have been talking. Our finance director is out of state on a personal matter, and so if there's something that's specific that I can't answer at a high level, that either maybe Ms. Roberts has already communicated, then we'll have to just get back, if you don't mind, and that would be sometime next week. So first of all, I have an opening statement and then a presentation, and we'll go through that.
Before you do that, Commissioner, will you have copies of your presentation available for the committee?
Yeah, absolutely.
We don't need them necessarily today, but
I think
you already have. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you. So, first of all, as I said yesterday, I wish to commend the subcommittee for tackling these two very, very important and complicated issues pertaining to the veteran community. Today, I'll be providing this statement and also this presentation. It's a brief slide presentation isolating some of the important issues pertaining to health care provided to Minnesota's heroes and their spouses. I believe that the members have already received answers to the questions that you have been sending to our way, and I have copies here to refer to them if we need to. I'll be glad then to answer any of your questions. Before I begin, allow me to make this important distinction from the opening statements the other day. The bonding of Phase 3, $54.1 million, is not a phase that simply yields 100 beds. It is unfortunate that this continues to be the view. Many of the members of this subcommittee have been provided a tour that explained that there is so very much more to this phase than 100 beds. It is the final phase of an integrated campus. It provides the electrical, supply methods, heat, IT, methods of food transportation, sewer upgrades, warehouse with receiving and shipping for the entire agency, and a consolidated pharmacy serving the entire network of homes. In 2008, there was a review of this campus, and the recommendation made was that it was more cost-effective to build new rather than renovate. The estimated cost at that time that was presented to the legislature and to the governor was that it would cost $115 million. This plan was accepted by both the agency and the state government of Minnesota. With the inclusion of the last phase, bonding and federal match, our total cost will be $121 million. And with all due respect, it would seem to me that the Department of Administration and MDVA should be recognized for having kept that close to the projected cost, given that this is a 6-year-plus project, and the fact that, given the history of estimating projects in this state, whether it be the light rail, whether it be the Viking Stadium, whether it be the renovation of this Capitol. We are within 3% of what the estimated cost was for this. And I think that the Department of Administration and this agency, MDVA, they've done a darn good job at managing those resources and staying as close to the budget that we promised we were going to be at. I will state here and discuss during the slide presentation that the Commissioner of MDVA has a statutory authority to apply for and receive federal grants, which includes construction grants. And so, with that authority comes the implied authority to manage those applications. In mid-April, the Department of Veterans Affairs at the federal level contacted us regarding a bed count issue, and this resulted in a communication with DVA construction grant program. At that time, it was identified that we were not accurately tracking our beds. I will be showing this in a slide momentarily and explaining it in detail. Let it suffice here to simply state that we were told that we were over our cap and we would need to bring back applications to the state level. We did that, and those applications were applications that were in priority 2 category, and those were priority 2 is a category that is not being funded and still may be submitted. Those applications still may be submitted at a future date. Some further clarification. 2 of those priority 2 applications that were returned back to the state level had been at priority 2 for over 5 years. The other 2 homes had their applications rejected at the time of submission right out of the box due to the proximity to each other. The governor's office was notified, and they in fact did notify several legislatures on this action. Some of those members are members of this committee, and others were members who proposed homes in their communities. We do recognize that the agency, and specifically my office, did not speak to the communities. But to that point, the reason was that these applications are simply set aside at our level, and none of these applications have had legislative funding since they were submitted. We do not believe that this was an issue, since they can be resurrected at any time once there is A, capacity, and B, the legislature chooses to commit to funding them. Personally, I would say to you that holding MDVA as the culprit to pulling these back to state level is not something that is isolated just to us. The legislature shares a part to this because they are, after all, the approving authority of where I can build. This has left us, however, to critically review much of the inherited studies and the reports that you and this agency have relied on. As such, we've recognized that the 2009 study, which is often quoted and referred to, is seriously flawed, as it fails to look at the only requirement of the federal government, and that is the 2-hour drive time, as explicitly shown in 38 CFR 58.40B. There, it pertains to the exclusion that often this committee and other members have asked, is there a right to waiver? There is. It's explained in the subparagraph B, but it pertains to a project, not to the cap. The cap is reviewed by the Department of Veterans Affairs and Secretary every 4 years. Our last review, 2010. At that time, they took us from 982 to the current cap of 1,058. I am unsure of the methodology to which the Secretary of the Veterans Affairs calculates and uses. However, in what I have been able to find out, their projection is really looking at the age group of 65 and older vets in the population, and that's how they set the category or the cap. I'm not also sure if this is an automatic review by the VA or if we need to develop a position paper requesting an increase. We're seeking that guidance from them now, but we're a little bit challenged with the 1 October closure. So even though they're funded, they're a little bit overran.
Commissioner, if I don't like to interrupt you, but on this one point, we all know that there's, short of another major conflict, we've got a declining number of veterans in the state, and it's estimated that the number of veterans will decrease by almost as much as 50% in the next 25 years. Would that indicate to you, just off the top of your head, that the bed cap would not increase? In fact, it may decrease?
Mr. Chair, my gut reaction is going to be yes, but I will caveat if you will give me that chance. So earlier in September, the National Association of State Veterans Homes met in Nashville with the VA, which is obviously always at these, and the conversation has been going to comments earlier with this. That you're correct, the aging population is diminishing, but the acuities that are being seen with our veterans, traumatic brain injuries, post-traumatic stress, other substance abuse, has called upon us to, as an association with the VA, to ask the question, how do we flex? How do we take what we have and be able to flex it so that we're able to provide to a different population? So 65 plus now becomes 35 to 59. And how do we change federal rules, and how do we approach that from the federal government down through the state veterans program, which is a subset of the veterans? So I think that there's conversations of which this subcommittee in Minnesota has been out in front of, and it is also the thing that we've been asking to do as we look at new homes, whether it be from Bemidji to Rochester. The question that I ask communities all the time is, why, not just why do you want the home, but what are you going to, what kind of services are you looking to provide? Can we flex them so that we can go from an assisted living to perhaps a long-term care and be responsible with that construction so that we can do that? And that's the challenges that we're facing at the moment in the agency.
Commissioner, do you mind if we ask questions as you go along, or would you prefer to make your presentation and have us say it?
I'm glad to answer them. If I have a slide to the presentation, if you'll allow me to defer till we get there, and then I will answer your questions, that'd be fine, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Detmer has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Commissioner. I think we need to make it very clear. You know, we had several communities that put in applications for a veterans home, and how that when we had to pull those names back from the VA, I know there was communities that were upset. So I think it's very important that we make it clear why we had to do that, and maybe just make that clear so that everybody here understands why we had to pull those names back, and they're still at the state level. So.
Mr. Chair, Representative, in my slide presentation that I'm sorry that you don't have a copy of, but in that slide presentation there is a complete slide about the beds and the applications and a conversation about that at that time.
Yeah.
Good. Thank you very much. Please proceed.
Here's our discussion topics. We're going to talk about what we do. I know you already know that, so it'll be a short conversation. We'll talk about our wait lists. I know that that's an issue for the committee to understand. We want to talk about the Minneapolis campus development briefly, current bed count, cost of care, and CMS certification and Medicaid, Medicare billing. This is a little bit of, we should have used a larger font. It looked a lot larger on my personal screen. So if you will, the Veterans Home Division provides a continuum of long-term care for its residents with a strong emphasis on remembering and recognizing the service and sacrifices of all veterans. The state veteran homes in Minnesota, located in Minneapolis, Hastings, Silver Bay, Laverne, and Fergus Falls, focus on providing the excellent care and services that Minnesotans expect for their state military heroes. These 5 homes manage medical care on a 24/7 basis through a combination of skilled nursing care beds, domiciliary, which we parenthesize as board and care, rehabilitation, recreational therapy, work therapy, and dementia programs, along with the adult daycare. These are in the Minneapolis, Hastings, Silver Bay areas. These are the services that we provide. There's been much discussion, and you've heard the word domiciliary listed and discussed both in housing and stuff. And you heard very articulate discussion yesterday from Kathleen Vitalis that explained to you that she is a socioeconomic, as well will be these other facilities for homeless veterans, as opposed to what we provide in our domiciliary as board and care. I realize that you have a medical model. I realize you have definitions. The state of Minnesota refers to board and care. That's the Hastings in Minnesota. The Department of Veterans Affairs calls those domiciliaries. And so, as we have often talked about, common languages become kind of different because it just depends on where you're sitting at the time. But I wanted to make sure that we reemphasize that. We've given you some demographics, and again, I apologize for the size, but basically the important parts are currently our skilled nursing homes or care, it averages, the males average about 78 years old, and they're mostly World War II veterans. They have 3 primary diagnoses: Alzheimer's, dementia, and organic brain syndrome. With the dementia, I might point out, very important thing, that there are behavioral disturbances that go with that level of dementia, usually related to their service. That's an important distinction because as you look at contract housing, and as you heard from the VA when you went on your tour there in the VAMC, it makes contract housing and community nursing homes a challenge for those homes because they're much different behavior patterns that they experience, sometimes aggressive, more so than the typical dementia that you would experience from a non-veteran. In our domiciliary, those are currently primarily Vietnam vets. They average about 58 years old. We do have some Afghan and Iraqi veterans there and some Desert Storm veterans as well. But what you're watching there are hypertension, diabetes, cardiac disorders, and other diagnoses that we're seeing are schizophrenic disorders, alcohol and chemical dependencies, and often depression and other psychosis. In our adult day center, which I might point out is only the second one in the nation certified by the Department of Veterans Affairs, the average age is 81. They're usually World War II Korean veterans, and they suffer from the top diagnosis of Alzheimer's, dementias, and Parkinson's disease. I'd like to state at this time one of the things that Mr. Held was alluding to. I think that you see a decrease in the number of personnel going into homes because, quite frankly, as I believe Helen and Mary Mullen have found out in their research, the cost of health care is extremely high and is estimated to continue to go up every year at least 9%. So it becomes a burden financially. And so I think families do, in fact, keep their family. They want to keep them as long as they can naturally, but also financially. I think that that's a driving factor, that they wait to the last minute to get them to some home. I would also say we're going to research to see if we can pull that information you asked ourselves about how many veterans are identified in community-based homes. But I would say to you that I have not heard of one case where a veteran who is in a community-based home and is on one of my waiting lists refuses to come and doesn't transfer when he or she becomes number one on the list. And they come to us because it is a better situation for them, and it is the camaraderie that they seek. Because community nursing homes are primarily female population, and as you saw when you took the tour, we have quite a number of our population that is mostly male. This is an eye chart for our wait list. The red is our active waiting list. It is quite high. Now, it is over 700 in just Minneapolis alone, and these are as of August of this year. Our wait list overall is probably about 1,040. Actually, 979 when I look at my figures.
Commissioner, just for a point of clarification, what is the average time that a person will spend in the veterans home?
I think that varies from location to location. In the report that we sent you with answers, we gave you one of those. We looked at that. I want to tell you, I don't want to guess. If you give me a second, let me pull this up. In the report that we sent to you, our average time right now for skilled nursing runs about 10 months to a year. Here's the problem. Most of our folks stay there and enjoy the rest of their lives there. And I have not been able to become that fortuitous in being able to focus on when that will happen. So, so we have folks that have been in our system for quite a while, and then we have rashes of vacancies available. So we're running around about 10 to 12 months wait list. It varies from home to home. So,
more specifically, I was looking at how long the average person who gets into the home will remain in the home.
Yeah, I don't have that information for you. I can try to get that. I'm not so sure that we track that.
I know, anecdotally, I don't know if Mr. Held is still here, but I think in private nursing homes, it usually runs 3 to 4 years is about the average time. So I was just wondering if it's comparable, if you could look that up for us.
Yep, we'll be glad to do that.
Thank you.
Any other questions, sir? This is the Minneapolis campus. We just wanted to take a couple of moments and show you this. As you know, Building 17 is going to be moving through Phase 2 and then Phase 3. I'm not sure that there's any questions on that, but if you have any questions regarding the bonding or we're currently working with the Department of Labor and Industry as well as with the Department of Administration to move through to the rebids. I will say this it was very good to have that 54 point or the $18 million bonded because of the infrastructure that is tied to that. It's important to maintain that bonding. And the reason for that is because we already have in our checkbook the federal funds for Phase 2. The requirement in the contract that the state of Minnesota entered into was, once I build, I have to fill Phase 2, 17 North. Without the infrastructure that's tied to Phase 3, I would not be able to turn the lights on. That becomes a real significant issue for the state of Minnesota, because if we're not able to occupy, we'll have to write the check back to the federal government for the $24.5 million. And should you have not bonded Phase 3, then perhaps they would have asked me for their $24.5 million if we were not, or if we choose not to ever build 17 South. So it is an integrated campus on so many levels, from financing to an integration of giving quality and continuum of care to our veterans.
Commissioner, Representative Detmer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Commissioner. Where's the federal VA at in terms of helping to do their share? Excuse me, their share of Phase 3. You know, do we have to start contacting our legislators in Washington to make sure that they come through with their share?
Mr. Chair, Representative, an often asked question. And I would say to you, I think that, first of all, I think that contacting our legislatures our senators and representatives in Washington really is not going to get you the bang for your phone call. They have a very objective system. They've issued, I keep thinking that this is September still, but in September they issued what was, I believe, 56 or 59 projects that they are considering for funding from their $83 million that's been allocated for construction. 2 of them are safety, and I think it's 54 that are open construction issues. They listed everybody alphabetically by state. We are on that. So as I've spoken with the DVA, and we do that frequently, we're waiting simply for their legal department to finalize the list and the priority and check the block, because they know they're going to turn somebody down. Minnesota is in the final cut. That's all that I can tell you. And now with the shutdown, I'm hoping that we'll still see something soon. But
Commissioner, when we were on the tour, you indicated that the Phase 3 was a safety issue. So are we one of the homes that have somewhat of a priority then out of that 59, in your opinion at least?
Well, I can tell you that we submitted our safety issue. The safety issue evolved around the patient lifts. What the VA was finding was that states were not moving to the ceiling lifts as fast as they would like to, and that's a resident safety view on their point from DVA. So what they did was they told the states, that if you're submitting a grant and you're not meeting the 25% safety issues of ceilings, that your particular grant will get points taken off, if you will. We meet that. We have that. We have the funding for that. We financed that ourselves out of our operating dollars, because I couldn't wait for you till May of this year. So we took that out of our operating dollars in order to, or asset preservation, perhaps, I'm not quite sure where we found the money from. It may be from our carry forward, and I would get back with you on that.
Okay.
But we funded that ourselves, I believe it was from our operating dollars. And so that we could move forward and get the maximum credit for our phase. And I think that put us into priority 1 for construction of phase 3. So we're cautiously optimistic.
Okay, thank you.
So here we are. This is our projects. The Minneapolis home. Building 19 is a 100-bed skilled nurse facility, phase 1. There were no beds before because that was an abandoned building, and there's 100 beds now. It's completed and occupied as of July of 2012. The cost, $28.9 million. That's both state and federal funding. It is pending CMS certification. To your question earlier with Mr. Held, yes, we did contact DHS for them to come in because they do the contract with CMS. They came in, they did it. We're waiting for their recommendation. They have recommended CMS certification, and we're pending the Medicaid, Medicare gurus in Chicago that do this to provide us with the final determination. And we're waiting for that. That should come hopefully any day now.
Okay, this begs a couple of questions then on the CMS certification. Evidently, you can do it by building. Is that your interpretation, that we don't have to do the entire facility? And if that's the case, can we do the other 4 homes building by building and receive the certification?
Mr. Chair, I'd like to take that question, if I may.
Ms. Gustin.
I'm Robin Gaustad, and I'm the Senior Director for Veterans Healthcare for the Minnesota Department of Veteran Affairs. And I'm just going to step back 3 steps. In 2008 and 9, the state asked the Minnesota Department of Veteran Affairs if we would look at the feasibility of becoming CMS certified at our veterans' homes. We can only become CMS certified, obviously, in our 4 skilled veterans' homes. We determined at that time that because, and it's in your report, that because Minneapolis has the greatest opportunity because of the size of the campus, that we would pursue CMS certification at Minneapolis first.
Is that, Ms. Gustin, is that on a building-by-building basis?
Yes.
Or the entire campus, building by building?
Yes, sir. And so when we did our original feasibility study, we looked at 3 areas. One of them was a financial analysis. A second one was a clinical and care analysis. And the third component was the physical plant. And where we were struggling with the Minneapolis campus was the physical plant. And so as we demolished Building 9 and built our new 100-bed Building 19, we built that building according to CMS building standards, knowing that we were going to seek CMS certification for that building. And in the interim, we also had to bring many other systems up to speed, including billing systems, our electronic health record systems, our training of our clinical staff to be able to provide more acute critical care for our veterans. So there was an entire host of working steps and tasks and work plans that went together to create the opportunity earlier this year for us to seek CMS certification. And we have now had our certification survey. At the exit interview of that survey, we were told that the survey went well and that they were going to make a recommendation to CMS for certification for our Minneapolis Building 19 facility. So my hope and plan would be for our agency, along with the Deputy Commissioner and obviously our staff that support these efforts, is that as soon as 17 North is rebuilt, demolished and rebuilt, that we would seek CMS certification for that building as well, and 17 South to follow. In the interim, it is our plan, as soon as we receive CMS certification for Building 19, so that we can begin billing CMS, that we move to the Veterans Home in Silver Bay. And then from there, we would move to Fergus Falls and Laverne. And because of the recent remodeling of some of those facilities and the newer facilities that exist in Laverne and in Fergus Falls, we're fairly confident that we can do that from a facility, from an environmental perspective, with very little updates. So it's really the staff training and preparation and expanding our billing and our documentation systems, which we are also in the process of doing.
Thank you, Ms. Costa. And that, I think, begs a further question as to the differences between CMA standards and VA standards. Some say the CMS standards are higher, but at least they're somewhat different. So are there costs involved, and would you need additional funds from the state, or can you do this through operational costs to bring all your facilities up to the CMS standards?
Mr. Chairman, if I refer to your packet of questions, and question number 6 answers that question. In a nutshell, the VA requires that the state veterans' homes meet all of the licensing requirements of the state of Minnesota and the certifications of VA in order for us to receive our per diem. The CMS certification differs from these in that they're a little bit more intense. They're much more refined, if you will. In some aspects, they have a higher requirement. CMS certification meets all of the requirements of both DVA and also MDH. And the agency has made that decision to move to at least the training as we assess. We have no data. We have the affinity reports. I believe that you've received a copy of the affinity report that was done back in 2009. But we have no live data to see just what the cost benefits are. We certainly know what Medicare D has done for us, and we have made considerably, we have brought in revenue from Medicare D very well. We anticipate, though, that the issue to your question, we think that we're doing this training, we're going to train our staff to that level with the dollars that we currently have. Okay. And then whatever costs that may be needed to actually move the units, we're looking at now, since we're learning from Building 19 what we need to do in other sites. And so we're already moving in those directions with that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
And Ms. Costa, you didn't mention the Hastings home. Is that because that's a board and care? So that you wouldn't seek CMS certification or on that home?
Mr. Chair, committee members, no, we are not going to, for the domiciliary at Minneapolis or the domiciliary at Hastings, pursue Medicare certification because it's not a skilled nursing facility.
Okay, thank you very much.
Going along with this slide, Mr. Chairman, 17 North is a 100-bed skilled nurse facility. It's phase 2. It's 100 beds before. It'll be 100 beds when we complete. We anticipate that the winter of 2014 to be the time frame that we'll start with the demolition. Currently, we're in the bidding conversations right now because we held the bids up, and we worked with the Department of Administration to make sure that we were within budget, and then awaited the decision of phase 3, and then we moved forward. That kind of all happened at the same time. Bids came in at the same time that we were waiting for session to end, and so we had suspended the bids pending the decision because we thought it was a fiscally responsible thing for us to do, as opposed to move forward with knocking down something that we didn't have money or authority to do.
Commissioner, is that early winter 14 or late winter 14? Because I thought you mentioned March before, too.
Yeah, right now we're just working with the Department of Labor and Industry because we have a sewer matter that we need to get, and since they're the ones that give us the building permits and construction permits, we need to meet that issue. And so we have contractors on site. Apparently, it is the question of a 10-inch pipe going into an 8-inch, as you are well aware that that's not a good thing.
Yeah.
So we're working with them now and have contractors in the Department of Administration is working to address that issue. Once we satisfy Dolly, they issue the permit, we'll be moving forward with demolition.
And that would still be in the March timeframe, or is it later now?
We can destroy it any time. It's the building piece that will wait till the spring.
Okay, thank you.
Building 16 is a remodel, domiciliary of 50 beds. It was part of Phase 2. That has been completed and occupied here in July of this year. And that's the part of the funding of Phase 2 overall. That was, so Phase 2 funding, which we have, both from federal and state, is roughly $36.2 million. And then the Phase 3, Building 17 South, 100 beds before and 100 beds after. Pre-design was done in 2012 for a little over $3 million. And we received the 18.9 state match. We're just waiting now for the federal government to let us know. They are aware we've been priority 1 with phases 1 and 2, and they are aware that this is a phased program and that there is dependencies on Phase 3 or in Phase 3 for Phase 2. So I'm very, very optimistic. Just don't know the time frame. Building 6. Building 6 is the original soldiers' home, currently occupied 91 beds. Those are all the residents from 17 North when we vacated so that we could demo. We moved them to there. When the project is completed, we will have an increase of 100 beds on this campus for a total of 441. 391 skilled nursing and 50 domiciliary.
And Commissioner, the adult daycare, as I understand it, there's a difference of opinion between how you interpret whether that we're using beds for that and how the VA, federal VA looks at it. They're including the adult daycare in the bed count?
No, Mr. Chairman, they are not including the adult daycare. The folks that are there that come, they live at home. They just come during the daytime. We receive a per diem for them, yes. But the adult day is not part of our bed count and isn't managed like that.
Okay, good, thank you.
Representative. Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair and Commissioner. Just, the legislature has been doing a lot of work with the veterans-owned small businesses, and we would hope that through the contracts and developing the construction phase of these projects that some of these veterans-owned small businesses can be on site and maybe get some of these contracts. I know we've been trying to increase the number of veterans-owned small businesses in the state. MnDOT has been working with veterans-owned small businesses, and now possibly with the Viking Stadium too. We're working on that project too. So, just a side note that we try to put these veterans-owned small businesses to work here in Minnesota, especially on this project.
Mr. Chair, Representative, that's an excellent point. Unfortunately, MDVA does not play a part in the bidding process. That works through the Department of Administration and the REX area specifically. I'm with you on this. I think that it's great to be able to get veterans to work for veterans, and if we can do that, but I think that this is a question that the Department of Administration is best suited to answer that process for you. Here is the all-important slide. This is the bed count. Allow me to explain this to you. On the left, beds currently operated, which is what the VA looks at when they look at bed count. As you see, you'll see Hastings at 180, Fergus Falls, Silver Bay, and Laverne. The Minneapolis Building 19, 100 beds and 1650. Building 6, as I just explained, are the 17 North residents, but that's 17 North. It's 91, and 17 South has 100 for a total of 790 beds. Let me halt here and explain the process of Washington math, apparently, because I had a whole day of explanation on it. In the 38 CFR, we just looked at the chart that said 1,058 beds, and nobody before or up until this time read the entire piece. If they had read the entire law, they would have realized, as it was explained to us, it's not just the beds you operate. It is the unmet needs that you're asking for. We provided a copy of this for you in your packet. And that is the very first question, I believe. It says the state's unmet need for state home, nursing home, and domiciliary bed is the number of the following chart, the 1,058, for that, minus the sum of nursing homes and domiciliaries in operation at the state home facilities, and the number of state home, nursing home, and domiciliary beds not yet in operation, but for which a grant has either been requested or awarded. So we didn't realize that for every application that we send forward, that was considered an unmet count. So in mid-April, when DVA called us, they had this conversation with us, and as on the right, you'll see the number of beds. To complicate this even further, if you will read down a little more, new beds count 1-to-1 ratio. So, if I may, we'll pick any one of these. Let's pick Brainerd. Brainerd asked for 70 beds. So the count from 790 added 70 beds. However, Minneapolis 17 North is a replacement bed. And in their minds, in Washington, that counts for 2. The one that is actually being occupied and the bed that's being proposed, even though it's a 1-for-1 relationship. I can't explain the logic. I can only tell you that that is the way that they count. And so the result was, in our conversation on the 10th of April with them, we were 520 beds over. Because Minneapolis had 200 beds with 17 South and 17 North, those applications were forward. Wilmer, Montevideo, both of them 90 beds. Bemidji and Brainerd, 70 beds. With a cap, that left us with a total of 1,310 beds. We needed to get down below the 1,058 beds. We brought back Wilmer, Montevideo, Bemidji, and Brainerd to the state level. That was 320 beds, brings us down to operational beds 990. Now, as we construct 17 North and occupy 17 North, we get a bed count back to 100 beds. So at the end of the day, when we're totally completed constructions of Phase 3, the state of Minnesota will have 890 beds. I know that that's a little confusing. However, I will say to you that, again, we didn't understand that the way they counted it. We didn't ask, because up until this past year, we weren't challenged by the count. But because there was been such an influx of interest for state veterans homes in a variety of communities, suddenly we found ourselves in a mathematical quagmire, and we didn't understand that an application counted against us. We assumed that until you authorize funding, that an application was just an application. So,
Commissioner, also, to further complicate this, and I hope you can simplify it for me, my understanding is that Laverne counts against South Dakota, and someplace in Wisconsin counts against Minnesota in terms of bed counts.
yeah, I'm not quite sure. Ms. Mullen and I discussed this yesterday. We sit in a what's called the VISN, which is the Integrated Service Network for the VA. Laverne is serviced, if you will, from the VAMC in Sioux Falls,
Right.
just like Fergus Falls is serviced from North Dakota in Fargo. But that was some confusion with that. They're very clear about the fact that Laverne belongs to Minnesota. And I made sure of that.
Okay,
So,
thank you.
any questions?
And just for
This
the
is a
audience, as we're going through this, we were all scratching our wooden heads trying to figure this out because we kept getting conflicting numbers from the VA, and you were trying to work through your numbers, and even the double count bed number was still bothering me last night, trying to figure out why that works the way it does. But
I hope that this slide answers this graphically for you. And again, I take the responsibility for the fact that I didn't pick up the discussion and the phone to speak with this. But I'd like to address this matter up front with you right now, because I think it's important for the communities and for the representatives and senators who represent these towns to understand this. I made a statement earlier. I want to say it again. I believe that the 2009 study that is often recited is flawed. And it's flawed because the chart that ranked these towns failed to consider the only requirement that you find in 38 CFR 5940 at the section B, which discusses that there must be a 2-hour time difference between, let me read it, documentation to establish a need for the exception based on travel distances of at least 2 hours by land transportation or any other usual mode of transportation if land transportation is not available between a veteran population center sufficient for the establishment of a state home and any existing state home. So the chart that's in 2009 talks about CBOCs, VAMCs, regular community hospitals, all of which are important. I think that it's good. But those were self-imposed by either MDVA or whoever put this together. Nothing in this chart talks about the only federal requirement of 2 hours. And in fact, if it wasn't for the fact that Bemidji and Brainerd submitted together, we may not have even realized it then, because they rejected those applications based on the fact of proximity, which then made me look at everything else. And I asked, how do you measure? And the email I got back was, our legal department utilizes Google Maps. That's how they determine. Much like any of us, when we submit an expense report, we don't pull up the GIS tool and figure out what the distances were. We pull up MapQuest or Google Maps and submit our mileage, and the state pays that. So the federal government does the same thing. They use the common man's tool. And I would say to you that I went out and spent my weekend playing with Google Maps and MapQuest, and of the 17 communities identified in this report as qualified for be considered for a new home, only 8 of them meet the 2-hour measure. So, it's very difficult. In this particular case, I will say to you, Wilmer may never get a home. And the reason is, when the legislature passed the language for Wilmer in 2007, they used Wilmer. And I'm going to mess up this county's name, and I apologize. But when it came back in 2009, I believe it was, and entered the amendment for a home in the county of Candio.
Candio High.
Thank you.
It's like Cattaraugus.
The language that was passed gave authorization for the Department of Administration to enter into a 20-year lease. And as we have discussed, and as the material that we submitted to you, to have a state veterans home and to receive per diem for that state veterans home, the state of Minnesota must own the property and own the building. So I would say to you, as it's written, Wilmer would never get funded by the federal government for that reason alone, aside from the fact that it also sits within 45 minutes of Montevideo. From Montevideo, we pulled back at the last minute because they are there. There's questions of their distance. Fergus Falls, I believe. Let me pull out my study and my MapQuest stuff. The city of Montevideo sits 2 hours and 3 minutes from Fergus Falls, so they would be eligible to be considered. And they have been raising money for, well, since 2000, and I believe 2005, Mike? 2005, when the legislature said, go out and raise the money. So they've been raising money for a long time, but we've not had any movement, so that's why their packet at the very last was brought back to state level to get down below the 1,058. As I said, the Bemidji Brainerd was already canceled just because of proximity, and I'm not authorized at my level at the agency, the commissioner's not authorized to determine which one of those applications we should move forward on, because only the legislature can direct where a state veterans home is built. So that is my slide presentation and an explanation of why we pulled these back to the state level and some of the errors and omissions of this 2009 that would require us to review this a little bit more intensely and honestly, and in light of where they're supposed to be looked at.
And this, I just want to state also that I heard what you said, that you notified the governor's office and that key legislators were advised when the applications were pulled. The problem is, I received a letter yesterday from Pat Kubley, who's the widow of Senator Kubley from Montevideo, saying they had a great rally in September in Montevideo. Everyone's behind the home, and yet in April we knew that that application had been pulled. And I'm not pointing fingers. I'm just trying to emphasize the need for greater clarity and to make sure, especially that our veterans organizations in these communities are informed and that they don't go forward thinking that the home is still, moving ahead and we're going to have something. So you and I see things the same way. We're cut from the same cloth. But I just wanted to make that point, and as I say, I don't know where the fault lies, whether it's with the governor's office or with the chairs, but I think that it's pretty sad.
Mr. Representative, thank you. I want to say for the record, I accept full responsibility at my level for not having contacted these communities myself. And it was an oversight. It was not intentional. I guess we have had this conversation. Minnesota, the Minneapolis South project was the only project that was before the legislature for consideration of funding. And while I failed to do anything, I would also say that, as I stated earlier, these are not applications that are dead. They're applications that are maintained at the state level right now, because if I put them towards Washington, they have to be counted in our count. So when and if the legislature of the great state of Minnesota chooses to fund one of these projects, I will hand deliver that to Washington myself. And I think that that's the message that is a fair message for both sides. I think that there is miscommunication on both sides of the fence. And the MDVA is fully willing and able to accept that we failed to communicate better with the communities. But I think also the realization from the legislature to these communities as to whether or not 8 years of fundraising to try to get a home, is that going to be something that's going to be coming to fruition, is only a question that can be answered from your side of the aisle, not from the agency, because I don't control that. And that's a fair assumption, and I hope that that's honest. I don't want to say criticism. It's an honest exchange here between you and I hope that you understand my approach to that.
Good. And Commissioner, I too have to apologize to you and to Mr. McEnany for my rather acerbic email, and I know that you had another one from another representative. But I just think it's a matter of clarity and transparency. And once we get beyond this, I mean, that's water over the dam. We're going to move ahead, and we're going to take care of veterans. But it's over.
Yes, there it is. Thank you.
Yes, thank you,
Chair.
Representative.
Maybe when we're done with this committee, maybe something could come out from this committee to these communities, and just to explain in simple language why the decisions had to be made that way. And I think that would be good maybe to come from this committee.
Good. I think that's probably a good idea. You'll help me with that, Commissioner, won't you?
I'll be glad to assist you any way I can. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not going to spend much time. This is our finances. As Ms. Roberts has pointed out, these are the three areas that we receive our financing from: per diem, resident maintenance charges, and state general appropriations. I'm not going to bore you with too much of this. I think this slide of definitions is important because, as you've asked a series of questions as it relates to 70%ers and percentages like that, full per diem or prevailing rate, which is what the VA calls it, prevailing rate, we call it full per diem. That's the rate that's reimbursed to the homes for providing care to eligible veterans of 70% or more service-connected. Prevailing rate is based on a Medicare Part A RUG rate. Please don't ask about RUG rates because we'll be here for months. It's a very complicated process, but it's a RUG rate scale for skilled nursing facilities. A regular per diem is the rate reimbursed to the states for providing for those veterans under 70%. I will also point out to you that spouses do not receive per diem. Maintenance charges. Maintenance charges determined according to each individual's ability to pay. It's based on individual assets, incomes, and expenses. And the state law allows us to take them in. $3,000 is by rule right now. The maximum assets that a veteran may have before they must pay full cost of care. And full cost of care is the average daily rate for the entire facility to provide care for all residents. We thought this might be a little bit easier, though I guess you can't see it, so I guess it's not so easy. But what this is basically a breakdown of how cost of care and how it moves all the way down. As you can see, the cost of operating the Minnesota's homes are direct cost care, indirect cost care, the Veterans Homes Administration and general overhead, plus our drug costs. Direct care for cost of care calculations then is direct care cost, indirect, drug costs, and any Medicare D we subtract at that reimbursement, and that's considered cost of care. For residents that are 70% or more, cost of care is minus their full per diem. That actually is no cost to the veteran then, because the prevailing rate covers the individual cost of care.
Commissioner, on that point, the VA reimbursement rate is like $424 a day, which is, I think, around $12,000 a month. And as I recall from the information you sent, the cost for a room is around $9,900. Does the VA still pay that $424, or do they pay it only up to the actual cost of care?
No, so, Mr. Chair, this slide here will show you that. This is the cost of care for 70%ers. It's a little bit different in Minneapolis. With the urban, it's $424.41, and for rural, $362. And they pay that to us. Regardless. I will also point out to you that this shows that overall we have roughly 42 70%ers or more within our homes right now, which is representative of about 3 to 4%. Our other category that we isolated for you was the cost of care for spouses. I'd like to point out one of the questions that you'll have is, why is it that a spouse pays more, or a veteran pays more than a spouse? And that's because typically the spouses don't have any income. At this age bracket, they come from a time frame when spouses primarily stayed home and didn't work. And so their assets, their income is much less. And so the veteran, his calculation is based on a higher asset.
Generally speaking, Commissioner, are the spouses then only source of income Social Security payments?
Yes.
Yeah.
And so I would say to you, you see here that we pay a considerable amount of money. Once you subtract out cost of care minus the maintenance charges across the way. I will also point out to you that even if they had Medicaid, while we would charge for those, or we would conclude that, I would also point out to you that the state, even in community homes, they pay a portion of that cost of care through Medicaid as well, so it's a balance. Some of the questions that you had with the 70 percenters would remind you that while we get the full prevailing rate, $424 in Minneapolis, they're 70 percenters for a reason. And so their medication, the type of care, the level of issues raises individual cost of care as well. So if you just look at it from a pure dollar standpoint, it looks like 70 percenters, we should just have all of that. But at the same time, as you can see, it's only 3% of my population currently. Second, with the complicated acuity comes more medication, more costs. And also, it's important to have a mix of rug rates within our system because a level of high-intensity care burns out staff a lot faster as well. And so it's very important for us to find that balance, and almost all state homes encourage to find that. I've not found one yet that only accepts or looks at a percentage approach. That concludes my brief. If there's any questions, I'm glad to speak to it.
I have a question, and perhaps Ms. Gossett, you're better set to answer this, is that if you move to CMS funding, does the cost of the veterans' homes then shift to DHS? Or does it remain with MDVA?
Yeah, I would say, too, that it stays with MDVA, Mr. Chairman. The reason is because we are a subset of the VA. The State Veterans Homes is a program of the Department of Veterans Administration and is per diem and all of that. It does not take away the requirement for us to meet the state licensing requirements. Mm-hmm. But if we choose to be CMS, it is our choice to be CMS. We still have to follow then the CMS regulations. Mm-hmm. Is that overseen? I would point out to you that, remember, DHS does come in and survey us. It is a license requirement. So when they would come in to do us, we get CMS certification. Then to maintain CMS certification, we would get DHS that comes in to survey us for licensing as well as the VA.
And maybe I'll just clarify something. DHS sets, as your former person who was testifying mentioned, DHS sets rates and oversees the Medicaid program for the state of Minnesota. Medicare is a federal program, and the Minnesota Department of Health acts as the survey arm in the state of Minnesota for Minnesota nursing homes to provide on-site survey for CMS certification and annual surveys thereafter for the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services. So just to be really clear, DHS has a responsibility for the oversight of Medicaid and those programs and setting those rates and adjusting those and setting the criteria to participate in that program. Medicare is a federal program. The state of Minnesota, through the Minnesota Department of Health, does annual and certification initial surveys of state homes in Minnesota to become CMS certified. So we're speaking of two different programs administered in two different ways, one by the state and one by the feds, just to be very clear about that.
And so the funding flow coming from the federal government, whether it's from the VA or from Health and Human Services, still goes through MDVA. It
Yeah.
wouldn't go through, what I was looking at was, currently, the biggest part of your budget is the homes, and if it would be shifted to Department of Human Service, or Health and Human Services, it will remain. We'll see some fluctuations in the amounts, but as you shift from one to the other. Okay.
Yeah, just think about it this way. Think about it maybe in terms of somebody who goes to the doctor's office or to the hospital. If you go to the hospital or to the doctor's office and they provide services to you, they, as a provider, bill Medicare, they bill Medicaid, they bill other third-party payers, and they get the revenue for those services. And so their legal organization is the billing agent and the revenue collector of those monies. It would work the same way for the Minnesota Department of Veteran Affairs. We are actually set up, we hired and we have trained and we've actually practiced dropping some bills. We will bill Medicare, Medicaid, other third-party payers. We will bill them just like any other provider arm would if you're certified under their programs to do that. And then they pay us the revenue or the payment on those bills. And that is captured within MDVA and then put into our revenue stream and into our budget, just like our state appropriations and our federal VA per diems.
Super.
Does that help?
Yes.
Thank you,
very
sir.
much. Oh, yes. On veterans, you had mentioned transferring from private facilities to the home. They get on the waiting list, and if their number comes up, they tend to come to the MDVA home. What about veterans transferring from one home to another? Do we have people, for example, I think that Silver Bay is a little easier to get into than Minneapolis, for example. Do you find people going into one facility because then they think they can transfer to another one when a bed becomes available?
So in our rules, we have a opportunity. You can, first of all, you can apply for any of the 4 homes, or actually any of the 5 homes if you'd like. But for skilled nursing, you can apply for any of the homes when you make your application, and you can go on all 4 waiting lists if that's what you would like to do. Once you are accepted at a home, that's your home. When does somebody in Silver Bay have an opportunity to transfer? Usually it is based by exception in our rules for medical conditions. I believe we answered this question in our list of questions. But technically there's no bumping. Once you come on, if you have a certified medical reason that requires you to come to, we'll use Minneapolis, because in Silver Bay, whatever acuity you have either was complicated or you acquired another problem that they don't have the capability in that area to address, but they do in Minneapolis, then you're allowed to transfer at the next bed. It is the only bumping, if you will, that's authorized by our rules currently. So you just can't come to Silver Bay and say, when my name comes up, because you come off the list then, once you're admitted, we don't move you around. You can wait on the list, but I've not seen anybody do the moving. I think that there are some isolated times when that's happened, but the wait list is so long that by the time they get to that, I'm not so sure that, and I don't have all that information. But from a bumping standpoint, that's the only medical authorization. Any comment?
No.
Okay, and I don't have my MapQuest thing with me here, but our home in Hastings is, I would think, within 2 hours of the Minneapolis home. How does that work? Was there an exception made for that facility when we opened that?
So I don't know that answer off the top of my head because I wasn't here when Hastings opened up in 1980-something. my answer would be to you that they're two very distinct programs. And even though that there is a small domiciliary of 50 beds on Minneapolis campus, it is primarily a skilled nursing campus. And domiciliary in Hastings, or the boarding care in Hastings, is a whole different type of care. That would be what my guess would be as to why they allowed that to stand the way it is.
And I, too, have been trying to understand, the VA rules that you provided us. And although it is somewhat clear, there still is a little room for wiggle in there. So
I would point out to you also that domiciliaries across the country are not a prevalent level of care, if you will. I believe that there is less than 9 across the entire country of domiciliaries. Mm-hmm. And I can get that information from you right off from the website. So.
Yeah, and I was just looking to see if Ms. Vitalis was here, because I think that some of the care that we provide at the facility in Hastings is probably very similar to the type of work that she does with.
No, not at.
You shaking your head, so.
Not at all. Ms. Vitale and MACV, just like Common Bonds and some of the others, they provide a socioeconomic environment. Those folks that participate in that program, in the MACV level, and Kathleen, correct me if I'm wrong, they are independent livers. They're capable of independent living. The domiciliary residents in both Hastings and Minneapolis do not possess that skill set. We provide them a 24/7, we provide medication, we provide social, psychological, and psychiatric oversight. And so those are not services that are provided through MACV. And that's a very important distinction because being homeless is not a requirement of coming to the domiciliaries or admission within the State Veteran Home Network. You have to have a certified medical need, even in Hastings or the domiciliary in Minneapolis, requires that the Utilization Review Board verifies that there is a medical need for you to be there and into what is a much higher level of intense medical oversight than what you would have in independent living, where you're receiving a HUD-VASH voucher that says you must be connected to the VA medical system. That means you make appointments and go to the VAMC and you sit down with what you need, but you go home at the end of the night. My folks don't go home at the end of the night. That is their home, 24/7, because of the intensity of care that they need, because they don't have the skill set for independent living.
But, Commissioner, you are, through your rehab programs and the training programs at Hastings, and I would assume at the Minneapolis domiciliary, you're dealing with younger veterans primarily. Are you trying to rehab them so that they can live independently?
So,
and do they sort of graduate from the program and go out and work on their own, live on their own?
Mr. Chairman, that is the goal that we have. Our approach is this. Our goal with domiciliary residents is to optimize their life situation. In some cases, that will mean being able to transition, unlike transitional housing, transition to independent living. We call that, because they happen to both have bridges near them, crossing the bridge into independent living. But the fact of the matter is that the majority of our residents in those domiciliaries are not transitioning. We're looking at programs, as we know, we've discussed this, the need to revamp the programs, and we are revamping programs to try to develop opportunities for a rehabilitation, if you will, both vocational and occupational, and other programs that will support them. But the bottom line is that many of those men and women that we have currently are residents that will soon just simply transition over into long-term care eventually. We're working to change some of that. We're hoping every once in a while we get, like last week, we got a news, one of our guys actually got a full-time job over at the Veterans Administration, and there was a big celebration because that is an important goal. And so we talk about that at the time of admission. We talk about the discharge plan, because if we don't talk about discharge capability, then all they're going to do is sit there. So we do challenge them to look to see, how do you move forward? Can you move forward? Some of them will do it quickly. Most of them will take a long time for them to move through that process, given the acuities that they're facing.
Okay, thank you. Oh, yes, on the CMS certification, if we move to that, will that have any impact on the waiting lists? No, it won't change it.
Won't change it. Beds are a bed.
And can I ask another question that I don't quite understand? Why you have two waiting lists? You have the active waiting list and the sort of waiting list. But if you're not on the active waiting list, you don't get into the home. So what is the purpose of the other list? Is it only to give you an idea of how many people are interested in being admitted to the home at some point?
So our rules, Mr. Chairman, our rules require that we have an active and inactive, and here's the difference. Active waiting list is the person who comes in and says, I'll take the next available bed. Mm-hmm. Inactive waiting list is somebody who may be in early stages of a problem and knows that eventually I need to come there. But they may wish to do a number of things before they have within their personal lives, whatever that may be. And so they come in, they provide us with that shell, if you will, of an application, but says, I'm not ready to come in right yet, but we're gathering more information to be able to do that. That could be a number of things. It could be because they want to seek more information from the VA for disability. They may want to somehow realign their assets. They may wish that I want to stay home as long as I can, so I don't want to be on the active list. I just as soon stay off. So the process of that active and inactive list, which is identified in our rules, is very fluid at times. In fact, there's times where if you keep saying, if you're on the active list, I want to go to the inactive list, you can't keep moving back and forth. They're very prescriptive about the way we do that because waiting lists is a very sensitive issue. And we want to be sure that we are as objective as we can in the application and the methodology of utilizing the wait lists.
And for either waiting list, does it require a doctor's recommendation?
It does require a doctor's recommendation. You can apply, but the actual admission process, when you go through the process, requires both. We'll take in doctor's information from your private doctor, but we also are assessed by the utilization board, which includes both a primary physician and often a psychologist and social worker that will sit and review and interview the resident if capable, or at least the next spouse or the next of kin.
Okay, so the doctor's recommendation isn't needed until they are close to being admitted.
Correct.
Okay, good, thank you. Let's see if there's anything else. We had a letter from a lady that was a copy was sent to us. I think it went to you or someone in MDVA regarding the transfer of patients from one facility to another or one program to another. And I think that she was alluding to someone being in an adult daycare and having a priority over others going into the nursing home. Is that factual?
Yeah.
I know a lot of people get misinformation, so I'm just asking if that's if you are in the adult daycare program, can you then transfer to a bed in the nursing home if it should happen that you need it?
Mr. Chairman, I'll go general to specific for you. The answer, general answer, is no. The adult day center is a day-to-day operational thing. It doesn't place you on the list to get into, nor does it give you priority to get into the state nursing home in Minneapolis or any other home. In this particular instance, this individual was referred over by the Veterans Administration Adult Day Center. They have one there as well.
I see.
What they did not, they being the VA, provided bad information to folks that were there, saying that that was a way to circumvent the system. I've had this conversation with Director Kelly, explained to him that the information given by their folks to residents or participants of their adult day center is not factual. Our rules do not allow for bumping. The adult day center isn't even in our, when I say isn't even in our rules, there's not even a section regarding adult day center. We're actually developing that for the reviser as we speak, but it does not, it's not an avenue in. And so that was a very difficult conversation to have with that particular family. But I believe that information out of the VA, federal VA, has been clarified because I've not heard anything more from that.
Thank you. I appreciate that. That really concludes my questions, unless you have
Just a quick comment, Mr. Chair. I'd like to thank Commissioner for coming in and sharing this information with us, and also the public that came in today for your support to come in and figure out what's going on with this committee. And I would also suggest maybe if we could, I've visited the Minneapolis home, and also my wife and I have a little place up in Silver Bay, visited the home there. That might be something that maybe get these committee members, and those that are not here, to maybe make a visit to some of our homes and actually see the facilities and see what's going on there. So that would be my recommendation, that we do visit the homes.
Yes, thank you, Representative Detmer. I actually asked the committee members on the bus if they would like to go visit the other homes, and some of them said they've been on the bonding committees and they visited every place there is to visit. So I personally would, I am going to go to Mankato to visit the facility there, but I also would like to visit the homes and see what we're doing for the veterans. Commissioner,
Mr. Chairman, I don't have a facility in Mankato.
no, but I know you don't.
Okay, just want to make sure that I don't want another application.
Yeah. I see Mr. Wolf behind you. So, I want to thank you. This has been very informative, and I won't say that we've banged heads, but we've worked to push the point that both of us are trying to make, and that is to provide the most service to the most veterans that we possibly can. We are both dedicated to that, and I know that this committee is. So thank you for what you do. Ms. Gosted, thank you for your work as well. And we'll keep on. We have to issue a report to the Speaker by the 1st of February. I hope to get it done before that. So we'll continue our communication as we go over the report. I would like to ask you to do two things. One is to look at the information that Mary Mullen has provided to the committee, and to review that very carefully to make sure that it corresponds with what you have. And the other thing is on that 2009 study, if you would give us a critique of that and why it isn't a good study, so that in addition to notifying the communities of the reasons why the applications were pulled and where we are with the applications, and the possibility that they can be restarted, that we work together on these things. So,
Is there a specific timeline that you'd like me to follow, sir?
no, we still have some time, and we have more work to do. I know this is actually a pretty big project, and but I think it's very valuable, and I'm looking forward. I don't know exactly what recommendations we're going to have, but we'll work together on those. And any recommendations that come out of the committee, I would hope that you would look at them carefully and have your comments as well as we move forward. And we're not going to dump this all on you at once and say, okay, now look at it. As we move along, we'll ask you to participate in the discussion.
Thank you much for the courtesy, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate the opportunity today.
Thank you, Commissioner. Ms. Costa. Is there anyone in the audience that has would like to testify or has any comments at all? Okay. Yeah. Thanks. Yes, we have some people who would like to testify. If you'd come forward, please. Identify yourself for the record and good morning, sir.
My name is Nick Kakos. I'm a World War II veteran, and I'm a volunteer at the Minneapolis Veterans Home. I've been working there for the past 8 years, and I'm in charge of the Memorial Day program every year. And I've heard comments and part of the issues that you people are concerned with about making beds available in some of the smaller towns. And I want to speak very strongly about, in my opinion, the difference of attending as a resident a veterans home as opposed to a private nursing home. And Commissioner Gallucci, or Deputy Commissioner, brought it out in the beginning of his comments. There is a camaraderie among veterans, particularly the older age, and he indicated World War II Korean vets are a very dominant group in the state nursing homes. Getting together and being able to communicate. There's also female veterans at these homes, and they have a camaraderie even with a male. So being able to communicate and get along on a daily basis is very important to them. Secondly, the vets homes have a multitude of programs throughout the year on a daily basis that is not available in most of the private nursing homes. The veterans organizations, the VFW, the American Legion, the DAV, they're constant providers, bingo, musical programs, visitation. That's critical for the daily maintenance and keep your morale and spirit up. And so from that viewpoint, we recently had a member of our post transfer from Hopkins Nursing Home to the Minneapolis VA. Hopkins Nursing Home he was the only male. That's a good sized home. He felt isolated. He was on a waiting list, 8 or 9, 10 months, whatever it was, he qualified. He's in first stage dementia. He's the happiest guy that you could run into. So not only visit those physically, but talk to some of the residents. You're going to find that there's a major, major difference in care from a state veterans-operated home as opposed to a private nursing home. And I'm familiar with nursing homes. I was in charge of my mother-in-law's care for 15 years. She was paralyzed 50% down the middle. And she was a resident at the Bryant Walker Methodist Nursing Home. They provide good care. I, as a veteran, would feel very uncomfortable there. I was talking to Deputy Commissioner yesterday. This is a point that really hit home, and he did not mention it today. But he indicated that about 10% of the nursing homes fail. What are you going to do when you have a veteran in a nursing home? He's the only veteran, and it fails. What are you going to do with him? Thank you for your comments.
Good, thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to testify? Ms. Lee? Please identify yourself for the
Yes.
record.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, thank you. I'm Jean Lee, President and Executive Director of Children's Hope International, R&R Family Centers, which is transitional housing, shelters, and permanent housing. Children's Hope International is our advocacy arm, and I also head APAC, which is a consortium of organizations combined of both Asian, Pacific, and American organizations and professionals in housing. I apologize, I did not have, I was at another event working on tools for consumers the other day, so I could not testify on veterans homelessness and housing options for veterans. So I would like to add that in, later. Okay. You're focusing now on the funding streams for short-term and long-term care for veterans. We've found that our veterans prefer home stability and assisted living within the homes by professional providers or their own family members and friends. What we advocate is funding to these family and relatives to be able to care for them in their homes. One of the other things they do is have private insurance. And an option we're looking for is it's currently at market rates as far as anybody else in need of nursing home care, and we'd like to see them get better rates. They also have the option as far as reverse mortgages on their homes. And this is something that through trusted agencies we're able to help them with. They also use private trusts and retirement plans, and we've helped them establish some of those as far as paying for some of their long-term and short-term care. They have the resources as far as families and friends who, besides providing care, they also help with the funds. They also have access to nonprofit providers and the funders that fund the nonprofits, the community clinics and the funders that fund the community clinics. And these are both outpatient and inpatient. We're currently working with one that's a residential center with 103 beds. There's also home visitation through the Department of Health, and we can see it expanding or tweaking it as far as focusing certain aspects on veterans. I was part of establishing that home visiting program many years ago. For those who need extensive 24-hour care, there's a combined method of some of these funds as far as assistance besides what the legislature is providing directly to the facilities that you've talked about. And I'm talking about facilities that are outside the ones that have been mentioned. There is disparities, however, in funding in providing the continuum of care and housing for the veterans. What we'd like to also see is funding go directly to veterans and their families, because as technology is moving ahead and medical devices are moving ahead to lessen the cost of health care, some of these things can be, some of the care can be done in the homes. And these are the tools we would like to make available to veterans and their families. As I mentioned before, we were working on healthy homes and communities so that veterans and their families could stay within the communities for as long as they like, and developing tools. And later the department or the health committee will be hearing more on one of the bills that we'll be passing where they'll be establishing some tools. However, they want government agencies or employees to be able to use the tools for the consumers versus having the tools so that it's something that the consumer can use and help themselves. And so another area is the family care plan. We've worked on helping veterans so that their family members and their friends are educated and trained in some of the lower skills as far as medical care that they can so that they could stay in their own homes. We have one currently that's, well, we've had a couple World War II veterans. One now is over 95, is a World War II Korean World War II veteran and Korea veteran. And so we're working with the families as far as developing some of those skills. And I think that the funding that comes through the Health Committee as far as the education and training available to families and friends at no cost or whatever to help would go a long way towards being able to care for the veterans and their families in the home.
Good.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Lane. I think you hit it right, that this is probably something that would be better addressed by Health and Human Services and in that committee, and that we look at funding sources and the possible, making sure that we take care of the veterans' needs through that. Thank you very much. Is there anyone else who would like to testify? Okay, seeing none, the committee is adjourned. Thank you all very much.